this is really interesting. It answers a question, where do you go when you die? If you really want to grow in this short and precious life, go to the places that scare you. Death is a rapid, involuntary, evolutionary ascent into the awakened state. We can become familiar with these extremely subtle states of mind and heart while we're still alive. If you die before you die, then when you die, you will not die. It's because we've consolidated our identity at the shallowest dimensions of our being that we are in fact afraid of these deeper dimensions of our being. We're afraid of the center of ourselves. When these false levels of identity are taken away from us, what's left then is what's called the indestructible continuum. Emptiness is phenomenologically equivalent to non-duality in the awakened state. This is the phenomenology of rebirth. This is where you're going to be reborn, into a dimension, the degree of openness you're familiar with. What death is, it's the grand opening into the nature of who we really are. And so here's the kicker. This material is really just as much about life as it is about death, because they co-emerge. You can't have life without death. And so the classic Tibetan Book of the Dead, for instance, is equally as much about the Tibetan Book of Life. And that's really important, because otherwise it's like, oh, like you said, it's dark and it's more, pathological and morose, but hardly. If you actually frame or reframe your life within the embrace of impermanence and death, this is not a morose journey. This is actually a way to bring yourself more fully into life. So it has a lot of pleasant surprises, which I think we can unpack.
So many people actually suppress the idea and the thought that they're going to pass because of the avoidance of how difficult it can be to look at it. What are, in your opinion, some of the pitfalls of such an approach?
Oh my gosh, they're enormous. I mean, this is, so we're going to go right into some cool stuff right off the bat. Well, first of all, my whole approach to psycho-spiritual journeys, the so-called path of awakening, to me, is not so much about getting real. I'm sorry, let me take that back. It's not so much about feeling good, unless you're talking about what's called basic goodness. It's about getting real. And getting real means involving yourself with challenging situations like old age, sickness, and death. And so there's a wonderful teaching from one of my main teachers, Trungpa Rinpoche. I was trained largely in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, but not exclusively so. And this is worth sharing, during one riff, he was teaching here in Colorado. And after a really powerful teaching on what's called the Bardo teachings in Tibetan Buddhism, Bardo's what's the kind of the central matrix, means gap, transitional process in between. Somebody was raised their hand and said, Rinpoche, you Buddhists, you're always talking about these really depressing topics like old age, sickness, and death. And
Suffering.
Rinpoche listened with total equanimity and said something like, old age, sickness, and death are not Buddhist inventions, right? And so it's just that this tradition faces it head on. There's no shying away from this bright light. And the more you can face it head on, you hit a very important topic. You talk about this notion of familiarity. This is big because in the Tibetan language, interestingly enough, the actual very word for meditation is Gom, Gom. And it's literally translated as to become familiar with. And so when you're meditating, you're becoming familiar with your mind, with who you are not. And so the vast teachings on the Bardo literature is basically about becoming familiar with this thing called death. What is it exactly? And so the way it ties into fear and repression, if you want, I can go right into that. This is a really beautiful, deep topic. So this is really pretty cool. So what happens here is actually quite fantastic. Really understanding, looking beneath the hood of why are we so afraid of death? Well, here's a little psychological maxim, an adage that's really revelatory in this regard. And it goes like this: if something affects you more than it informs you, if you react more than you respond, you're dealing with a projection. And if you think about that alone, oh my gosh, I must be projecting all the time. Well, what are we more adversely affected by than death? I can't think of anything. And the reason for that is because we project the crap out of it. Or actually, we project our crap into it. And so death itself is neutral. It's just the most natural thing in the world. But what happens is we unwittingly, unconsciously, here's the way it works. Our fear of death is a secondary inauthentic fear. what we're really afraid of is, here we go to the deep end, we're already dead. What we're actually really afraid of is if we take a very deep look into the center of our centerless selves, exactly what the wisdom traditions describe, you will find there is no center to your centerless self. In other words, it's called anatman, egolessness, that fundamentally, at the very core of your being, yes, you appear, we're talking, we have this relative provisional existence, but the unexamined life is not worth living, Plato. And so if you take a really good look and examine, you realize, well, where exactly is this thing called the self? It's just a storyline. The self itself is a construct. And so that's a pretty noble truth. That's something hard to swallow. So what we do in this unconscious level, and this is by also a cultural phenomena, where death is denied. I mean, Arnold Toynbee, the great historian, once said, death is un-American, which is quite something. Why? Because defeat is un-American. Or my favorite one is the Jack LaLanne, the fitness guru. I can't die. It would wreck my image, right?
Well, it's ironic as well because you got liberation as this real American frequency, but then liberating yourself from your body, sorry, not that one.
Yeah, exactly. So here's the way it goes. And then let's unpack this because this is, boy, we're stepping into the deep end right away. And again, don't take my word for this. Kick the tires, look under the hood, test the teaching against your experience. What happens here is we deny this harshest and noblest of all truths, that very deeply, inherently within you, there is no fundamental sense of I-ness or me-ness or selfness. I mean, all the great wisdom traditions radically proclaim this. So what we do is we deny it, we repress it, and then using the genius of Freud, there's some really brilliant things that Freud said about projection. We deny, we repress, we project. And so we deny, repress, project the fact that we're already dead, that we don't exist in the way we think we do. And what do? It's so bloody cool. We throw it as far away as we possibly can. What is farther away than the end of life? And so we have this like, oh, I don't want to deal with this. Let's just throw it into this refuse bin. And there it lies. And so therefore, our fear of death at the end of life is a secondary inauthentic fear. It's not fear to death. Death is neutral. Our real fear is we're already egoless. We already are selfless in this deepest sense. And so if we understand this, now all of a sudden you start to gain a foothold into one of the probably central maxims or teachings in the whole preparing to die business, which is, and that we can really unpack this one, if you die before you die, then when you die, you will not die. So if you can discover now, if you can uncover, if you can let go of, because that's letting go is just a euphemism for death, if you can become familiar with who you really are by letting go of who you are not, this is the real spiritual path, in my opinion, then this is the way you practice dying. This is the way you actually release levels of false identification, this kind of identity theft that takes place throughout the day. Become familiar with who we are not. There's that narrative that allows us, that's called the via negativa, the apophatic way. That allows us then to become familiar with who we really are. That's the cataphatic way, or the via positiva. And then the path is becoming more and more familiar with who we really are, which is this deathless nature. And so I'll pause for a second. One of my favorite philosophers, David Loy, says something like the following: such is the wisdom goal, to discover that which cannot die because it was never born. And so I'm going to use that as a platform, perhaps for somewhere, a conversation we can take this. But I realize I'm throwing a lot of noodles against the wall. So let me pause for a second and see how some of this lands with you.
Yeah, no, please, absolutely. And just continue to share away as it comes up, because this is absolutely fascinating. The concept of if you die before you die, when you die, you will not die is like, it's yeah, it's a lot to digest. One of the questions that's, I don't want to say plagued me because but one of the questions that's fascinated me is to die before your time. Having studied lots of different teachers on the podcast, I do wonder if that's one of the most surefire ways to enlightenment, or what we call enlightenment or perceive enlightenment. Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, really, one way to look at it, and this is a really a wonderful radical reframing of the whole death and dying journey, which I think is really important, is that if it's approached in the right way, and that's largely what my enterprise is with writing this book and teaching on it, death literally, end of life literally becomes a once in a lifetime opportunity. That there are literally more opportunities for rapid psychospiritual development at the end of life and in the Bardos, if you believe in this sort of thing, than there are in life. And that's because of the extraordinary fluidity that takes place in this open environment. And so many of the wisdom traditions, without doubt Buddhism, point out, and we can talk about this, that when you actually die, what you're dying to is deception. You're dying to relative truth. You're dying to fake news. You're dying to exclusive identification with form. That's what ego is. And so then what's revealed at the end of life is reality, is truth, isness. It's literally, in Sanskrit, it's literally called body of truth or dharma kaya. And so therefore, think about this for just a second. How would your view of the end of life change if you knew that the greatest opportunities for attaining enlightenment are available for you? And in fact, and we can go into some neuro and philosophical geek speak here, but the enlightened state is actually what everybody will experience when they enter the Bardo process and do die. The issue is recognition. Everybody experiences it. This is called phenomenal consciousness, but not everybody has recognition of it. That's called access consciousness. And so if we can actually become familiar, here's the kicker, if we can become familiar with these extremely subtle states of mind and heart while we're still alive, this is the dying before you die part. This is exactly what meditation does. Meditation is just death in slow motion. Well, this is where you get to the point that's just so fantastic. You want to get to the point with these teachings when you can say with a really confident smile on your face on your deathbed, been there, done that. In other words, you've already gone through this journey in advance. And this is why the great masters, and there's wonderful books, one called Graceful Exit that talks about this, they're completely fearless in the face of death. And in my book, Preparing to Die, I interviewed those 20 masters at the end of the book, part 3, talking to them exactly about this fearless, unflappable relationship to the end of life. And I've spent so much time with these amazing beings that to me, it never ceases to inspire me. How they approach the end of life with such grace and dignity and utter fearlessness, because they approach it just like we approach going to sleep every night. They realize they're just going to wake up the next day, in this case is the next life, and the journey is endless. It's just this wonderful, eternal dance of the play of the mind and the heart. So, boy, we're starting right out of the
Yeah,
gate.
you also, you also, I mean, in the book referred to it as somewhat contagious, their fearlessness, spending time with these people, and I thought that was pretty well to digest. And there's this one, there are many great little parables and I mean, the Tibetan teachings also with these deities and how they sort of, yeah, just giving your mind sort of archetypes and structures to coalesce around in order to navigate the journey so it makes it a bit more understandable and palatable is, I mean, I want to say it's genius, but it's more than that. um, but there's this element of one of the ones that really rested in for me is, you know, the light of the mother and the light of the child, you know, and the two just coming together at that point is this real, you know, is this real softening reminder. Now, there's two places we could go from here. One is Bardos and Mind. The other one is like the Hourglass fascinates me. And I think actually kind of going into the Hourglass first is probably where I want to go, because then we can from the Hourglass maybe make our way a bit more cohesively into the Bardos and Nature Mind, because you've been referring to mind. And I think it's absolutely fascinating because most of us, one of the fears I've got is like, as I leave what I know here in this realm and move into the next space, my mind, all I know is this mind that I occupy, and then it'll be gone. But actually, these teachings are like, no, no, whoa, 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 your mind is way more than that. And then there's the Bardos, so we'll get into that. But one of the fascinating things, and because I recently have watched two people pass, not because I'm a voyeur or anything, it just, you know, happened to my loved ones around me. But it was a incredible experience, almost as profound as watching someone being birthed into this world, to be honest.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just watching. I'd studied your book, and then, you know, these things, and watching the elements, and the different nature of the minds as we move through. Like, I could literally see it playing out. And I thought that was like the 8 stages, the hourglass. Stop talking, Amrit. Let Andrew explain.
No, I mean, we're hitting on some really awesome stuff here. So let me just say a couple things. One to tie it into the actual title of your podcast, Inspired Evolution. So let me just say something about this, how I think this is where we can really have some touch points and some resonance. What fundamentally happens here, reframing it in the language of your podcast, is death without preparation. Death is a rapid, involuntary, because most people don't want to die, evolutionary ascent or descent. Don't worry about the metaphor. The directionality doesn't matter. Rapid, involuntary, evolutionary ascent into the awakened state. That's fundamentally what's going to happen. And so again, if we are prepared with not just the Buddhist teachings, they don't have a patent on this, just with the truth of what's actually happening, which we can gain a deep understanding of with the practices that I'm going to talk about in just a second, we can actually take such complete advantage of this precious evolutionary opportunity that fundamentally we're going to be forced to differentiate from this egoic sense of self and the body that houses it and that is exclusively identified with. And we will then be on nature's non-negotiable term, that's the uncompromising kind of wrathful part of it. I now look at the end of life as a wrathful form of liberation. Wrathful because it is precisely non-negotiable and involuntary. But the bottom line is this dimension of experience is what you are going to ascend to. The issue again is, are you going to recognize it? And so what you hit on just a second ago, you nailed it, is that this mind, and by the way, in Sanskrit, same word for mind and heart is chitta, heart mind. So that we just don't think of this cognitive thing up here. I mean, mind is distributed throughout the soma and actually distributed throughout the universe, actually. But the biggest problem is this issue of familiarity.
Hey there, inspired souls. I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you that are subscribed to this channel. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel. Thank you so much for your incredible love and support. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon, and join the movement. Thank you so much in advance for your support.
We are so anxious and afraid of the end of life because we're too familiar. We're always meditating. See, Gom to become familiar with. We're always meditating, whether we know it or not. And right now, whether we know it or not, we're meditating on form. We're meditating on levels of development associated with it. That's ego. We're meditating on materialism. We're meditating on all these things that our culture tells us is the way reality actually is. And so one way to talk about the issue is we're too familiar with this limited, small-minded, form-based sense of self. And we're not enough familiar with our deeper, truer self. See? So too much familiarity with who we think we are, not enough familiarity with who we really are. This is what causes all the anxiety. And so if you understand, oh, I'm just dropping these false, limited layers of self. And by the way, they only become false and limited if we exclusively identify with them. There's nothing wrong with body. There's nothing wrong with the ego. These are necessary developmental stages in the human condition. The issue is not that. The issue is exclusive identification with these stages. And so if you understand, okay, let me differentiate from exclusive identification with form. And this, by the way, also includes the form, the contents of our own mind. We do this through meditation. We start to differentiate from that. We start to transition our portfolio into this kind of, I playfully say, the true IRA, the immortality retirement account. We start to shift our portfolio into truer, subtler, deeper dimensions of who we really are. And so this is why the meditations, and this is the core part of the Preparing to Die journey, is being introduced to teachings. That's what we're doing here. And then most importantly, the meditations that are really subtle, that are correlative to the subtle dimensions of the mind and heart that's revealed when we die. So that again, when we actually enter these stages on nature's non-negotiable terms, instead of being bewildered and disoriented, you have a complete understanding of, again, been there, done that. I am familiar with these subtle dimensions of my mind because I've worked with these really subtle dimensions in my meditation. And therefore, when nature forces you to let go, it is not a problem because you've already done it. You can always just then, the big issue is, and here's the really important thing, with all the stuff we're going to be talking about here in an hour and a half plus, there's going to be a lot of wind and a lot of flapping of lips and everything. The only thing you have to do to have a so-called good death is just open and relax. That's it. And I'm not being glib here. That's the only thing you have to do is open and relax. Just basically do nothing. But that, is really difficult because we're not human beings, we're human doings. So this is important because it's easy to get lost in the weeds. It can be roadkill. Oh, this Buddha stuff is so complicated. They have these maps and these stages and these deities and this book is impenetrable. What are they talking about? Well, if you understand that fundamentally all these teachings are designed to create an atmosphere where you can simply relax and let go, then the most natural of all processes occurs naturally. And then it becomes the easiest thing you could possibly do because it's actually the act of not doing. And that's ironically what makes it so hard, right? We're not good at not doing. So I'll pause there for a second because, again, there's so many avenues to take. But I think these are some of the summation points that are worth pointing out.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think, well, given the nature of, people have different opinions on when Kal Yuga starts and ends, but given the nature that we're in this Kal Yuga and it is more of a mental era to be a part of, it's interesting you refer to, well, it's not interesting, it's profound that you refer to open and relax. But then underneath that, once again, for me, is that familiarity piece, because the mind, when it deals to uncertainty, has this contract with contraction, has this contractive nature, right? Whereas I think understanding some of these pieces, and there is that element of how do I know what's shared by the Buddhists or, what Andrew's sharing, is true. Having said that, some part of your body does feel the truth when it knows the truth, but also just understanding that people have devoted time and energy to mapping out things like the Bardos, the nature of the mind, how it traverses these realms, does give the mind something to coalesce around, and I'm sure towards the end of today's podcast, I was hoping to get to this point of just the importance of the state of mind that you carry as you exit what we know as life. Like that was this really huge, profound takeaway. Because almost what I got, and this is, I don't want to sound like this because I know it's a podcast and, lots of people can tune in and I don't want someone getting the wrong idea, but it was almost as if you've got the karma that you accrue and that sets you on a certain trajectory. Yeah. But then also the state of mind that you're occupying also has equally as much impact on your trajectory. And it's like, well, you could almost trump your karma. And that's like, I don't say that out loud. But yeah, this was a deep revelation.
Yeah, boy, again, you're hitting at some super great things. Alan Watts once said something very beautiful around this. He said, "You are absolutely under no obligation to be who you were 5 minutes ago." And so this is really a wonderful maxim in terms of we think again, this is why levels of understanding, identity structure, and who we really are is key. Fundamentally, another way to talk about why we're so afraid of death is because we don't really know who we are. Because our identity is so consolidated in the superficial most dimension where appearance matters and anti-aging and all the things that are associated with beauty and immortality projects, it's because we've consolidated our identity at the shallowest dimensions of our being that we are in fact afraid of these deeper dimensions of our being. We're afraid of the center of ourselves. And so what happens is every night when we sleep, what happens in deep meditation, what happens when we die, is we kind of walk this labyrinth into the center of our centerless selves, as I mentioned earlier. And so if we have an understanding of that, the deep within us is this fundamental truth that we actually dip into it all the time, whether we know it or not, then we can start to see, and this is really important, the applicability of the meditative path, how these contemplations come into play, how understanding the complete spectrum of our being comes into play. Because then if we do that, then when these false levels of identity are taken away from us, out of form, subtle form is even removed. What's left then is what's called the indestructible continuum, the basic, literally, body of truth. This is who you really are. This is the part of you, and it's within us right now that does not grow old, does not get sick, and does not die. It's literally called the changeless nature, the formless nature of your being. Formless means deathless. So if we can transition, or again, William James, the great psychologist, said reality is what you attend to. Well, if you attend to superficiality and appearance and all that sort of thing, well, that becomes your reality. And you will suffer in direct proportion to that when all that's taken away from you. Is get old and you get sick and you get die. And you get die when you die. So if you transition your identity and attend to the more subtle inner realities, deep inner work, contemplation, meditation, psychospiritual path, well, then that becomes your reality. And then what happens is you still have recourse to these outer dimensions. You don't get rid of your appearance and your body and your form and your thoughts. You just have a profoundly new relationship to these more superficial dimensions. So this is a really big thing, know thyself. Carl Jung talked about the greatest privilege in life is to know who you really are. So this is another way to put it in frameworks that might be a little bit more psychological in the Western way, is to just take a deep journey, take a deep exploration within yourself. And then in terms of how do we know these teachings are true? Well, you can test these teachings magnificently if you're willing to do the inner work. You can attain deep states of formless meditation, and this is what the meditations are fundamentally designed to do, where this is not hyperbolic, this is not exaggerating. All respiration ceases. You're basically, if you were put in an fMRI, you're virtually flatlined, and yet you're resting in a deep foundational formless dimension of being. And so for me, yes, I read everything in print and I've studied this stuff endlessly. The single most important thing about getting ready for life is not merely just the study of death, but the practice of death, practicing letting go. And I've engaged in these meditations for so many years, doing a 3-year retreat, doing now what's called dark retreat, doing also really super high dose psychedelics in a very strict meditative fashion that take me to exactly these same dimensions where there is no sense of self. There's still something. That's who I really am. And that, again, this is a game changer because it allows you to actually see for yourself while you're still alive that these formless dimensions that I'm talking about, they are part of your experience. Everybody has access to these if they're willing to do the inner work and make this journey. And so part of the journey that I did in this book, my charter was to create these kind of global positioning systems, installing a GPS. And it's like, I take truth everywhere I can get it. There's a wonderful line from Dumbledore, right, from the Harry Potter series, where he says, to the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure. So what these teachings do is they organize the mind. They structure it in the best sense with knowledge and wisdom. And that is then what gives you the confidence to go through these journeys. And then just as equally, just as important, this confidence is then of tremendous value and benefit to others when they die, where you can really help others during these transitional process because of the stability, confidence born from your own experience. So
there's tuning into the subtler realms with your meditation. Some of the meditation, like the reverse meditations and the Tonglen. For me, the first time I was introduced to Tonglen was I think it's probably been about 6-7 years ago, and I remember immediately being like, well, I'm not doing that. What are you talking about? Instead of breathing in peace and letting go suffering, you're talking about breathing in suffering and letting go peace. What is wrong with you? It was this real, but it was really interesting because immediately, as soon as that thought clicked in, it was like, did you see your mind contract? And it was this really profound piece. And I wanted to share just a little, because I think we probably don't have a lot of time to go into all the different, because there's so many rich meditations. One thing I will just inject in though, you like me have this awareness of small meditations done more frequently actually yield great benefit. I think when I used my yesteryear as a meditation teacher, people used to think if I can just sit for 90 minutes or if I can sit for a couple of hours a day, and it's yeah, that's well and good, but also you notice from different students, the ones that actually sit just even like 5-10 minutes at a time more frequently, actually their relationship with mind is quite different. It's almost like they're getting like, yeah, their relationship with mind actually is quite different to the ones that are actually sitting for longer periods but less frequently. So I just wanted to sort of pepper that in there because I think that was a really cool point where I could correlate with some of my past work as meditation teacher. But the Tonglen, I mean, for me, it never really, the work started to really dawn on me in terms of how confronting the final frontier for the unprepared mind, as you put it in Dumbledore's word, can be. And then the opportunity that these reverse meditations, like it's noisy, perfect, sit still, embrace it all. Because the noise in the mind, potentially at that final frontier of like losing all the grip on everything it knows, and I really do want to get into that hourglass, starts to slip away. But that noise, and then that places this massive emphasis on, like not only do you carry your mind beyond like death, which then, build a relationship with your mind through your meditation, but also that frontier could be so clangy in terms of its internal noise that it presents. It could totally feel like a gong show. And then it gives you the opportunity to sort of, navigate that and practice for those periods.
Huge. I mean, you've again hit on some really fantastic topics. So yes, I mean, on one level, all of the Bardo teachings, Bardo Yoga is literally an entire corpus of teachings in the Tibetan tradition. It's a massive literature. And so in my languaging, the reverse meditations, these are the practices you mentioned in this term, where these also come from the tradition, by the way, where you do the reverse of what you would normally do. Instead of running away from disquieting experiences, you actually go directly into them. And so Bardo Yoga and what we're talking about here, this entire riff is a form of reverse meditation. Who wants to deal with this stuff? Who wants to do their advanced directives? Who wants to talk about old age, sickness, and death? Well, only those people who really want to face reality and grow up. It's like death and taxes. Face it now or face it later. So one sidebar here that's really guided my life is if you really want to grow in this short and precious life, if you really want to grow, go to the places that scare you. Go to the places where you're challenged. I'm not dissing at all Joseph Campbell's famous adage, follow your bliss. Hey, that's fantastic. But if you just follow your bliss, you're only going to get blissed out. What happens when you're not in a bliss zone? Well, my lifetime of experience of meditation and deep inner work is you really want to grow, you follow your fear. In other words, you go to the places that scare you. Pema Chodron has made a career out of this because this is where real truth lies. This is where all these unwanted projections lie. This is where all this great treasure trove of knowledge. I mean, Peter Kingsley, who's one of my favorite writers these days, he has an incredible line about what a genius it is to have wisdom tucked into death. What a spectacular way to hide wisdom. It's in these unwanted places. And so I have learned, I can tell you from my own experience, I have learned more about myself, more about the nature of mind and reality in studying death and dying than anything I've ever done. Because you go into the darkness, you go into these unwanted places, because that's where the truth really lies. So I've used this. This is why I did my 3-year retreat years ago. This is why I do extended dark retreat site right now as a form of death preparation. It's just a fantastic way to prepare. A couple other things, if you don't mind. I think this notion of short sessions repeated often, this is really, really a wonderful contribution. And in fact, let's just do one right now together with your audience.
Let's go.
Just to show you how compelling this is. And like you, I have my formal sessions every day. I go into retreat every day. I've done a 3-year retreat. But these short drips every day, and I'll give you one right now, are not a small contribution. So I'm going to show you all a very simple, it's literally called a one breath meditation session. I'm not making it up. It comes from what's called the Mahamudra tradition. And here what you do, and then this will tie into a narrative I'm going to ping off of in just a second. For the duration of one inhalation and one exhalation, one in-breath and out-breath, we simply all pause. This is a type of Bardo Yoga. Bardo Yoga is gap. Bardo Yoga is pause. So this is a way to work with gap, with pause. This is a way to work with Bardo Yoga throughout the day, is just pause. So we'll do it together right now. For one inhalation, one exhalation, you're just fully present for one breath. Let's do it. That's it. Meditation session over for today. Say, oh, my life is too busy. I don't have time to meditate. You have time to breathe. On breath meditation. And so with a little bit of nuance and practice, and I work with this like all the time throughout the day, every breath, in breath, is a mini rebirth. Every out breath is a mini death. And so this is a way to show how Bardo principles apply to every moment in life. Everything that ends or begins, and that's everything, abides by these principles. The death of a relationship, the death of a job, the end of a, I mean, you name it, anything that ends and what doesn't abides by these Bardo principles. And so literally you can remind yourself of this noble truth every time you breathe. Breathing in, this is the very first thing you do in this life. You're going to take an in-breath. Breathe out, it's the very last thing you're going to do in this life. You're going to take an out-breath. And so for me, this also doubles as a magnificent appreciation practice. I am literally one breath away from death. No exaggeration. I breathe out. I don't breathe in. I'm dead. So every time I pause throughout the day to do this, it's like taking a little sip of space in my contracted life, and that's where I'm going to go in just a second. This is a way, oh, these Bardo teachings, they're so esoteric. They're just like, what does it have to do? This is Bardo yoga. Take a little breath, take a little pause. And I mention this because you several times have used a really key term called contraction, which I want to say just a little bit about. This is a really big one. Because fundamentally, one way to look at what we are in this arrested form of development, this limited self-sense that we call ego, this is just a highly contracted, constipated, arrested form of development. We're just really highly contracted beings. What happens in deep meditation, what's going to happen when we die, is basically various degrees of openness. In deep meditation, we're opening, opening, opening. My favorite number one definition for meditation is habituation to openness, becoming familiar with openness. We're familiar with contraction. So when I say earlier, oh, we're identified with this outermost dimension, well, that's because we're identified with contraction, with grasping, with distraction. These meditative traditions allow us to become familiar with openness. So what we said earlier, now we have something we can feel. We're too familiar with contraction because we practice it all the time. In fact, we don't have to practice it. We've accomplished contraction. We're performing all the time. We're really contracted beings. And it manifests every time we're distracted, every time we grasp, we're contracting. So the tradition says, well, let's transition the identity to greater degrees of openness. So for me, this is what old age and then eventually death is. It's basically increased dimensions of openness, like the great poet Rumi once said, dropping into wider, wider rings of being. This is what's going to happen when we die. So for me, playful language, this is what death is. It's the grand opening into the nature of who we really are. And so here's the kicker. How familiar are you with this opening? How familiar are you with your identity in becoming the actual universe? And so, I'll get back to that in just a second. But I love interjecting this because it brings a felt sense to this journey, that it's not just this cerebral, intellectual, cognitive thing. I know what contraction feels like. Now when I feel it, when I feel myself contracting during the day, what do? Hit the pause button. Take a one breath meditation. Let's do one more. You see how easy it is. One more sip of space. Second meditation session done for today. So in the highest teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, Dzogchen and Mahamudra, just like you were saying 10 minutes ago, short sessions repeated often. That's the journey. And so every time you do this, you're inserting a little bit of space. You're doing a little bit of Bardo yoga every time you do this. And you start to sensitize yourself. It's like, whoa, I had no idea I was so contracted. This is why we suffer. And so we transition from contraction into openness. And then the openness is where the real freedom and development. And last thing, I invite everybody listening here to take a really close look at your experience. Look underneath any experience to which you would append the label spiritual. So in other words, reflect on any spiritual experience that you've had. I promise you, and I invite you to look for yourself, I promise you, underneath every one of these experiences that you would call spiritual, you will find some degree of openness. That's what makes it spiritual. And so if you understand this ground process or phenomenology, well, hey, wait a second, maybe I can practice openness. Maybe I can practice this immediacy of spirituality. And then you realize you have the capacity to have a spiritual experience under the most contracted experiences. And that's where I'm going with this. So like when you're sick and you're dying and the crap is hitting the fan and everything's going all to hell, here's the reverse meditation strategy. Don't get rid of the crap. When they say in America that the crap hits the fan, don't get rid of the crap, get rid of the fan. Stay with the crap, allow yourself to drop into it, and I can guide us through another practice that does this, and then basically open to the previously contracted experience. Then, like I mentioned earlier, obstacle transforms into opportunity. That which previously obstructed your path now accelerates it, and nothing can actually interrupt your path because everything interruption actually becomes your path because now you're armed with these fundamental mechanisms for growth. So I realize I'm tossing a lot of noodles on the wall here.
No, it's perfect. It's all very cohesive. Hey there, inspired souls. Just something I wanted to share is that one of the things that drives the coaching and mentoring that I do is this focus on living a life with minimizing regrets. Now, not to sound flippant, obviously one of the key things in there is we get to choose our regrets is part of my awareness, right? So there's always a sacrifice that's involved in life. Touch wood, someone that tells you otherwise potentially is trying to, sort of sugarcoat things. But one of the key things in there is we get to choose our regrets. There's definitely going to be things that you regret when you look back at the end of your life. That much is a given. I've lost people, I've lost beloveds, and there's always going to be that tinge of regret. But the key thing that you have the opportunity of in this lifetime is to choose. It's actually quite a powerful choice, the nature of your regret. And if you're not living the life that's most aligned to how you feel, is most aligned to you right now, well, this is why I am a coach and a mentor and completely inspired to support your evolution onwards, upwards, and inwards to creating a life that's completely in alignment to your spiritual calling. Not just getting clear on your vision and not just doing the limited belief, the inner belief work, the shadow work and all that sort of stuff, but actively, actually, practically creating it out as well, right? So this is for spiritual entrepreneurs looking for people that are also looking to create a life and live a life more aligned in their careers and also looking to lead consciously. So if any of those sounds like you and it sounds like you're out of alignment and you feel like you could benefit from coaching or mentoring at this time, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can book in a call with me at amritsandhu.com/call. That's amritsandhu.com/call for a free 30-minute call. I'd love to hear from you to see how we can champion your life into a place that is most aligned so that you have minimal regrets at that final frontier. It'll be my absolute honor to support you so. Should we do it? Should we move into that?
For sure, let's do it. So here's another one. This is great because, if I'm just sitting here flapping all over, you don't change when you just think about stuff, right? I mean, and I'm not dissing it. I'm a scholar. I write books. I read books. I'm not dissing it. We change when we feel things. And so what goes on with the end of life? Well, these are among the most powerfully felt experiences of life, even though they're unwanted feelings. So in this little exercise, let's do it together. In this little exercise, I will guide you through a beautiful practice that to me is this is like my go-to practice when the crap does hit the fan. When things are really hard, I'm in a heap of hurt, I'm around people who are dying, or I just got a cancer diagnosis or whatever. My default practice is the practice I'm now going to guide you through very briefly. And then we can have a little riff because I love this. Now we're talking translational spirituality. Now we're talking about how to bring this into our lives. So close your eyes for just a second. And sometimes a one breath meditation just to settle is a beautiful way to do this. So let's take our third one breath meditation, and then I'll guide you through this practice. Beautiful. Now with eyes closed, take your right hand, left hand doesn't matter, put it over your heart. I start, no exaggeration, I start every morning with this practice. And whenever things get difficult, I automatically take refuge in just this practice. So hand over heart, and then drop into whatever you're feeling right now. It does not matter. I'm feeling a tad bit speedy, a little bit windy, because I've been talking a lot. I'm feeling a tiny bit of contraction around that. And so what I'm doing is I'm allowing myself, with hand over heart, to say yes to radically accept whatever I'm feeling right now. It doesn't matter. Don't try to change what you're feeling. Don't try to be spiritual. Don't even try to be meditative. Just be yourself. This practice gives you permission to be human with all your brokenness and your goodness and your beauty and your ugliness and your pain. It's all welcome and held. The gesture over the hand, over the heart, is to hold yourself in what's sometimes called the cradle of loving kindness. And using some of the language we've just talked about, open to whatever you're feeling. The practice is the following. Feel it, whatever it might be, but don't feed it. You know you're feeding it when you start to run conceptual commentary on that feeling. Notice that. Relate to that briefly. Let it go. Return to the feeling. Open to yourself. And almost as a form, tying it into what we talked earlier, almost as a form of reverse meditation, when you're feeling something to which you would append the label crappy or unpleasant, you'll find a contracted experience there. Open to that. Open to the contractions. And this simple practice is beyond profound. It will eventually show you that you do not have to have any special experience to be free. You simply, might consider feeling whatever experience you're having as fully as you possibly can. This simple practice takes on industrial strength when you're in a heap of hurt and someone is dying, or you just got a life-threatening diagnosis. My right hand automatically comes to my heart when this happens. I close my eyes. I allow myself to drop into my experience. And this little practice creates an indestructible crucible, a container that allows me to relate in the most beautiful way to anything that arises. Swami Kripalu once said, the Hindu sage, the highest form of spiritual practice is self-observation without judgment. So don't judge, just feel. In my tradition, you could say the aspiration is to become a Buddha, to become an awakened one. You can fill in whatever sage or siddha from your tradition, it doesn't matter. Well, in my experience, before you can become a Buddha or a Christ or any other sage, before you can become a Buddha, you have to become fully human. And then perhaps you might discover that becoming fully human is to become a Buddha or Christ or the awakened ones. Wonderful. Put your hand down on your thigh. Just rest in silence for a minute. Fantastic. And so this incredibly simple practice belies tremendous profundity. It will eventually show you that you already have everything you could possibly want because you have a mind and a heart, and that mind and heart are divine and beautiful and good. There's nothing wrong with the contents of your experience. The issue is always one of relationship. There's nothing wrong with thoughts. Thoughts are just I like this languaging, thoughts are just the children of your mind. They're just the children of your mind. Hold your mind, love yourself. And so if you know this practice, this is a form of what's traditionally called metta or maitri, the practice of loving kindness. So this is a way to situate it within a kind of traditional framing. But to me, this is a wonderful way to bring in handful of topics that we've talked about. Now this is the way you practice living. This is the way you practice dying on the spot. And this simple gesture that no one has a patent on, to me, has been just so revelatory, so profound. So there you have it.
We are in a podcast, so I do have to ask a question, right? Moving beyond the felt sense. I could just rest here a while. The Bardos, we've mentioned him a few times in this podcast, and it's probably been rude of me to bring us this far into the conversation and not invite you in to share the Bardos. My awareness from having read the book, there are generally three Bardos, and there's a bit of a process attached to the Bardos. There's some real distinct timelines in certain places as well, which is quite fascinating for the mind to cling onto. 49 days, So, I appreciate this is quite a large opening if I was just like, what are the Bardos, Andrew?
Sure.
But I think for some people tuning into the podcast, this is probably the first time they've heard of the term Bardos, and we've been discussing Bardo yoga and such. So what are the Bardos, the three Bardos? And
Beautiful. So let's retrofit this concept. So Tibetan term Bardo literally means gap, transitional process in between. And you're alluding to the three death bardos. I'll mention those in just a second. But there are also three life bardos. We're in a bardo right now. So there's a bardo of living altogether. That's where we are. Within that is what's called the Bardo of meditation. So when you get involved with deep meditative contemplative work, that's also a type of Bardo. And then there's a Bardo of sleep and dream. Principally, when people use the term Bardo these days, they are in fact referring to the gap, if you believe in this sort of thing, between lives. And this is also connects to your hinting that your intimation of the hourglass. To the top part of the hourglass in that image, that's what's called the painful Bardo of dying. This is that period of time from the onset of a condition that will end in your life. And I have to say, somewhat jokingly here, Deepak Chopra has a wonderful riff on this where he says, life is a sexually transmitted terminal dis-ease. So in a certain sense, we're in this Bardo from day one, right? You have to have a little humor around this, right? Otherwise,
I can I can picture the way you said that. I heard it said in his voice as well, and it made it funnier. The Bardo is it's like, Deepak, only you could get away with saying such a thing.
he can be pretty funny, this guy. So the painful Bardo of dying, by the way, is only painful. Why is it called painful? It's painful because it hurts to let go. So when we're engaging in things like Bardo yoga and dying before we die, we're letting go on our terms. Letting go is a euphemism for death. We're letting go before we're being forced to let go. And right here, you start to realize if we can release our attachments to our thoughts, to our things, to everything now, we're actually preparing for the Bardo of dying. The second Bardo is the most subtle and profound of the Bardos. In the hourglass, this would be the point at the center. This one's called the luminous Bardo of Dharmata in Sanskrit. Dharmata, Dharmata, basically refers to isness, suchness, reality. This is a synonym for the enlightened state. So when you come down the hourglass and you land in the center, the 8 stages of this process, which the Buddhists describe in tremendous detail. And like you said, your experience is resonant with mine. When I'm at the side of people who are dying, and I work with death and dying all the time, I can see these 8 stages of the dissolution process very clearly in the person that I'm with. At the end of this dissolution stage, you so to speak, bottom out into reality. Or as Rumi put it so beautifully, death is your wedding with eternity. This is when you reach the altar. This is when you reach the union, literally the yoga, the union. You become nothing. You simultaneously become everything. We can come back to that later because this is another way, again, to remove all fear of death. And so depending on our familiarity or lack thereof, if we have familiarity with the Dharmata, I used the term earlier, Dharmakaya, it's virtually a synonym. If you have familiarity with God, with formlessness, with Buddha, whatever term you want to append to your version of the absolute, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about the languaging. Whatever term is the most profound absolute for you, that's according to this tradition is where you land. The issue is, can you recognize yourself as God? Can you recognize yourself as everything and nothing? Can you recognize yourself as the Buddha? Well, not without familiarity, not without some level of introduction. How can you expect to meet, let alone recognize in the darkness of death, something you haven't met and become familiar with in life? Hence the purpose of meditation. So this is why it says in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, recognition and liberation are simultaneous, but only for those who can recognize. Again, we're all going to experience it, but the people who are prepared will recognize it and those who aren't won't. And if you want to have a similitude or a concordant experience of these Bardos, by the way, this process, this phenomenology takes place every single night when we sleep. When you're falling asleep, you're going through a concordant experience of the Bardo of dying. When you fall into the deep dreamless space, that's a concordant experience or similitude of the Bardo of Dharmata. How many people listening can recognize deep, dreamless, formless sleep? Very few. Simply because it's a formless dimension. Ego is exclusive identification with form. How can something fully formed recognize the formless? It can't.
Well, there's
Or
also There's also that piece where, sorry to interrupt. You
No,
said there's also that piece where you, if you can wake up in your dream lucidly 7 times, you've actually, sorry,
that's
just,
fine. That's the next thing. That's your comment is a prescient one. So if you are familiar with these very subtle dimensions of your being, you will recognize deep dreamless sleep. And there are people who can do this with practices like yoga nidra and sleep yoga. But those who don't, then what happens is the bottom half of the hourglass. This is the karmic Bardo of becoming. This is where the similitude every night, this is the dream space. So if you don't recognize the dharmata, deep dreamless sleep, according to the Bardo teachings, this is where the 49 days of the Bardo take place. And these are archetypal numbers. Don't take them literally. Nothing in the Bardos is fixed. It's just an archetypal number. But, yeah, more or less statistically, I guess, I don't know how they did this poll, some exit poll, 49 days. This is where your comment about dreaming comes into play. So the lucid dreaming, dream yoga practices come in here. See, now you see all these different meditations that you can do during the day, even when you sleep and dream. These are all ways to prepare for what's literally called, and this is really interesting, like 30-second sidebar. In the Buddhist languaging, dream is a code word for manifestation of mind. We're always in a dream. And basically, there are 3 types of dream. There's what's called the nighttime dream. We know that. It's also called the double delusion or the example dream, which is really interesting. It suggests that second type of dream is this. This is the real dream. This is the dream from which the Buddha woke up, hence the awakened one. He's the ultimate lucid dreamer. That's the second type of dream. The third type of dream is what we're talking about here. It's called literally the dream at the end of time, death, Bardos. So this is really interesting. It answers a question, probably I'm asked almost more than any, where do you go when you die? Well, you simply transition from one dream to the next, like in the movie Inception, but you're in the Bardos. You simply transition from one manifestation of mind, heart to the next, because that never ends. That never began, that never ends. That play continues ad infinitum. So if you understand these principles, then you can work with them every single night when you fall asleep. That's where the 5 nocturnal meditations come in that I've written 3 books on. You can work with them at the end of life with the Bardo teachings that we're doing here. And then a third iteration is you can work with this in your meditation. You become facile with your meditations. When you drop into meditative absorption, you're dropping in towards this center point. And so you mentioned earlier, how do we know if these things are true? How can we have these experiences during the day? Well, like I alluded to earlier, you can do these advanced meditation states, the jhana states, the formless samadhis and whatnot, where you go through these stages. You can see them in a concordant fashion. You rest in the nature of mind. Egoless, there's no sense of self, there's no sense of other. You're resting in the awakened mind. That's a Bardo Dharmata. Then you come out of that space, and here's the difference. You come out of those spaces, the sages come out of those spaces, and they come out of the Bardos in a voluntary way. We now are driven by the laws of habit and karma, and our principal habit is for existence itself. But with familiarity with who we really are, we can maintain complete lucidity through this journey, just like advanced yogic practitioners can maintain lucidity through all states of sleeping. And they have people in the lab now, they're testing them. They're proving this. And so it's a little bit harder to prove this at the end of life. That's a little bit difficult. But using, inferential, what's called inferential reasoning or inferential valid cognition, you can gain a very deep, concordant experience of what allegedly happens when you die. So the last thing about the Bardos, and then I'll pause for a second, just as important, these Bardos occur all the time. We were in a collective Bardo a couple of years ago with COVID. The rug of reality was pulled off from under our feet. We went flying. That was a big Bardo. And then how we came back into form and how we continue to come back into form, reconstituting, that's a Bardo becoming. So if you understand these principles of arising, abiding, and cessation, and you'll see iterations of this in all the wisdom traditions, you start to see, oh my gosh, these Bardo principles have tremendous explanatory power. They'll help me with the end of my job, the end of my relationship, the end of the loss of a pet, the loss of a moment, the loss of whatever. this process is recapitulated with everything that comes into existence and everything that comes out.
Inspired Souls is an incredibly deep conversation, so if you're liking this conversation, please do give the video a like and a thumbs up. Not everybody loves content on death, dying and rebirth, but you doing so ensures that this content gets shared around the internet that little bit further, and I believe this is a really important conversation. Hopefully you do too. And join in on the conversation. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What are you taking away from Andrew Holecek and today's conversation? My God, like the Bardos, the other side, life after death. This is such an incredible conversation, touch wood. And the big takeaway for me is that most of us that carry a fear of death are afraid because it's the unknown, and making it known can actually have such a profound healing in it as well. What are you taking away from today's conversation? Leave your questions and comments for Andrew below. Any questions that are coming through, I could ask him next time he's on the episode as well. And for now, back to Andrew. There's also in the Hourglass this nature of, at the top there's this, we're sort of interfacing with our dual state, and at the bottom we're at this very interfacing with our dual state. But then there's this non-dual sort of liminal space that we occupy in that middle Bardos, which I think is fascinating because we've had some non-dual teachers and people that have popped through a little bit into those non-dual awarenesses on the podcast. And it's always really fascinating to see their awareness, because one of the things that always, my limited ego mind goes into this space. It's like, so tell me what it's like. And then there's always this, it's like it's the mind sort of coalesces into this, there's an emptiness, right? Which is kind of what it sounds like, emptiness. And so you're like, oh, so, your relationship with ego mind, functional mind, like you're removed from it. And there was a point that you said, which was recognition and liberation happen simultaneously. And these non-dual teachers always say, it's like, all you have to do is the light of awareness creates all the shifts. They'll say this thing, which is like, is the witnessing mind creates the shift. It's like all you have to do is to bring yourself to witness. It's the ego that thinks once I'm in witnessing, I've got to do something with it. But it's as soon as I witness, it starts to transmute and dissolve by itself. It was like your meditation, it was like just put your hand on your heart and just feel. And notice the narratives coming in. That's not it. Just feel, And so that non-dual teaching was really profound to sort of go, there's this space. And the thing that I wanted to point out to is it might feel like emptiness for the ego mind to listen to, but then when you ask them about the felt sense of that, they're like, oh no, it's not empty, Amrit. I see how you can get there, but it's full of love. And you're like, wait, what? Like the mind just kind of caves in on itself in that moment. It goes, wait, what? It just sounded so empty, and you just said it's full of love, and it's like, what? It just, it's really hard to reconcile that for the humble little mind. There's this part of me that's really wants to sort of dive into this with you. As we've got the Hourglass, you've got 5 outer dissolutions, you've got 3 inner dissolutions, and for me, maybe I'm a little bit shamanistic in my awareness more than I give myself credit for, but the fact that we move through sight, sound, smell, taste, and so on through the 5 outer dissolutions, but also how you paired them to hey, this is earth, and earth moves through, and then it's like water, and then water moves through, and then that was really profound and has really, for me as a teaching, was like, oh yeah, and we're built upon these elements, and it's almost like the magic of these elements. I don't want to look at them as deities, but part of me probably does. They sort of wield us into creation for us, right? Like there's an alchemy that they're forming for us to have this felt sense of experience of consciousness. And so and then they sort of release their hold on us as we go through. But there is this, I think it's important to talk about, because I think the mind associates suffering with some of these loosening of the grips of these elements, but looking at them as elemental, there's a real profound awareness that dropped in for me as you shared this in the book.
Yeah, boy, there's so much here. This is so great. I have to say just a tiny few things about the non-duality thing, because
Please,
there's so much traffic around non-duality these days, which is beautiful. We use that languaging, but it's completely resonant with everything that I've said. So when you drop into that center point, the luminous Bardo Dharmata, you're returning to your non-dual nature. The issue is, can duality recognize non-duality? No, it can't. Trungpa Rinpoche said, ego cannot attend its own funeral. So this is one very real reason why you can't actually experience these sorts of things, because you and these experiences are contradictory in terms. But the most important thing here to bring it into applicable terms for us is when we're doing the hand over heart thing, this is a way to establish a non-dual, not two relationship to the contents of our being. So every time you're feeling fully, completely, that's a non-dual experience. Whenever you contract away from it, usually when it's too unwanted and you zip out of your body and into your conceptualizing head, you're feeding it, that's a dual experience. So what is beyond profound here, this is so profound, is what Trungpa Rinpoche, one of my main teachers, said in his introduction to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that is so deep. When you're having this experience, so I'm trying to take this notion of non-duality that can sometimes be a little, abstract. I'm trying to bolt it into our immediate experience. When you put your hand over your heart and you pause and you allow yourself to feel 100%, you're inviting the experience of non-duality. And here's the way it works. What Trungpa Rinpoche said, and see if this isn't true for you. The absolute experience of duality is the experience of non-duality. Let me say this again. This is huge. The absolute experience of duality is the experience of non-duality. In other words, we're always in a non-dual reality. The path is perceptual, not actual. Let me say that again. The path is perceptual, not actual. You're not going anywhere. You're simply releasing the contractions and opening, there's those two narratives, opening the aperture of your awareness to realize, oh my gosh, I've been in a Pure Land my whole life. I've been in heaven my entire life. I've been in the Dharmata, non-duality, I-N, whatever term you want to live. I've been in that my entire life. The issue is I'm not recognizing it because I'm contracting away from it. And I contract away from it developmentally because there's no place for personal identity in that space. You/ego and that space are mutually exclusive. This is why something fully formed can't experience something fully formless, which is precisely why the untamed mind blacks out instead of lights up in deep dreamless sleep, and blacks out instead of lights up in the luminous Bardo Dharmata, because we're simply not familiar with it. The last thing around this, two things here, is the experience is fundamentally incredibly ordinary. So when you ask the teachers, what does it feel like? Well, my little riff here is we're driving for Hollywood on the psycho-spiritual path. We're driving to whatever. I like the notion of Hollywood. We're driving to Hollywood looking for some big parting of the sky experiences with angels and lights and choirs. But it's more like Kansas. It's more like Oklahoma. It's so ordinary what we're looking for. It's literally hiding in plain sight, which is precisely why we don't see it. And this is exactly why I love this line, Amrit, when Suzuki Roshi, the great Zen master, allegedly said, "Enlightenment was my biggest disappointment." Why did he say that? Because he was already so open. He was already so there that it was like literally the ultimate downer, the ultimate letdown. What we're looking for is so ordinary. And so if we understand this, along with hand over heart, this is the practice of non-duality. This is the practice of enlightenment. Yes, you can have these big, orgasmic, cataclysmic experiences, but you know what? The ecstasy, and don't take my word, test these teachings. The ecstasy is directly proportional to the preceding level of agony. In other words, if you're a really contracted mofo and you open, oh my God, it's just going to be this massive psycho-spiritual orgasm. If you're already really open and you just go boop, like Suzuki Roshi did, it's really ordinary. And the reason this is important is pause, take a one breath meditation. Open your eyes. That's it. Here, now. This is it. There's nothing but this. The path is perceptual, not actual. Last thing, and this is huge, emptiness. This is another way to talk about this. So this is yet a third term. Emptiness is phenomenologically equivalent to non-duality in the awakened state. It's just the Buddhist way of talking. It's a funny way of talking about love. Emptiness is just a really funny way to talk about love. And so when you become empty of self, this is the thing that we're so afraid of. Oh my gosh, I don't exist. That's the fear of emptiness, the fear of the truth. When you finally recognize the true empty nature of your being, and you hinted at this, emptiness really means fullness. Empty of self means full of other. And so therefore, when people say, what does it feel like? Well, it feels like love and beauty and goodness and all the things that make us feel so full. And if you touch into those true senses, you realize one reason those experiences are so beautiful is because you're not there. That's what makes them beautiful. That's what makes them spiritual. So I want to emphasize this because these are really important points. Non-duality is always already right here and right now. Emptiness really means fullness. This is where wisdom, which is emptiness, leads to compassion, which is fullness. And this is when you know if somebody's really got it. It's not by what they say. It's by what they do and how they act and how they love and how they relate to the world and how they serve the world. You want to see somebody's realization, don't read their books. Don't listen to what they say. How do they live? Do they open the door for someone else? Do they smile at people? Are they kind? Are they good? Are they loving? That's where you see the applied applications of this. So I wanted to throw that in because that you set out a really rich set of topics, and I just had to say one or two things. And because I just said that, I forgot what your initial question was.
It was the thank you. I really appreciate the discourse. The sight, sound, smell, taste,
Right.
touch, and the different elements, earth, as we move through earth, or as we start to move through these elements. Yeah, just the profundity of how we're bound by the elements in this experience, you know. So maybe you
Yeah,
can talk us through the transition through the 5 outer dissolutions firstly, and the
sure.
elements and their relationship with each of them.
Absolutely. So thank you for this. So yeah, so what happens with the upper part of the hourglass is we're going from gross to subtle, from most dualistic to most non-dualistic. And so therefore there's a from going from no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body. This is actually in Buddhism, this is the Heart Sutra. You're basically cascading away from the most dualistic sense, which is sight, into hearing, into smelling, into tasting, and so on, all the way down. With each one of these, there's a correlative dissolution of the elements. And so this is helpful in terms of understanding this whole notion of our relationship to the phenomenal world and our relationship to nature. Well, we are nature. We're not a manifestation of nature. We are nature. And this nature is embodied in these elements. And these elements have their origin with these fundamental lights. These are what take place in a really esoteric, magnificent fashion in the luminous Bardo Dharmata. That the nature of reality is made of this light, the clear light mind, that is then refracted through this kind of cosmic prism into 5 elements. This creates the subtle body. So this is the 3 stages of the inner dissolution. Then those elements are further constellated into the so-called physicality of our soma. Our bones and our muscles would be earth element. Water element would be all the fluids in our environment. Fire element would be metabolism and heat. Wind element, of course, is our respiration and mobility. Wind element is associated with all the orifices in our being. And so as we die, it's really interesting. In Sanskrit, it's considered impolite to say someone has died. The term they use is panchatvam gata, which is, and again, I'm not an official Sanskritist, so excuse me if I butcher the pronunciation, but it fundamentally means return to 5-ness. It means at the moment of death, we're returning our 5 elements to their primordial lender, which is Mother Earth. And so as we become nothing in this journey back, this is the shaman's journey, you become nothing as your elements are returned back to the earth, but guess what? You become everything. So this is the most staggeringly profound thing. Talk about a great swap. Talk about a great deal. If you really understand this, this is a game changer. Yes, when you die, this body is going to disappear. Everything constituted of form is going to disappear. You are going to become nothing. But simultaneous, that's the emptiness part. Simultaneous with that is you become everything. You become this planet. You become the cosmos. And so my dear friend Gregory Shaw, who wrote this wonderful book, you should bring this guy on, Hellenic Tantra. He has this incredible line there. He says, the only way to get out of the cosmos is to become the cosmos. The only way to get out of the cosmos is to become the cosmos. And so this is exactly what's going to happen when you die. You are finally going to get out of the universe by becoming the universe. And then the issue is, will you recognize yourself as being that big? Will you recognize yourself as the totality of this sacred earth and the totality of this universe? If you do, that's Buddhahood, that's awakening. But usually, this is so cool. Hang with me for just a second. So you're going through this Bardo thing, right? And then so I have this image of these little thought bubbles, right? So you end up in the Bardo Dharmata where you're like nothing. There's going to be a little thought bubble that pops up that's going to say, it's not me. I'm not nothing. I'm something. I'm not nobody. I'm somebody. Well, why does it say that? Because I'm familiar with something and somebody. So then what do? You contract. You contract. I can't be that open. I can't be that big. Openness is a synonym for emptiness. I'm not the universe. I'm a schmuck. So you contract. The second level of contraction, or I should say, the first level of contraction is that. And then what happens is the deities appear. The archetypes, the gods, the deities manifest. Second bubble. That's not me. I'm not a deity. I'm not divine. I'm a confused piece of whatever. And so you miss, like a board game, you miss stage 2 of the process of awakening. And you keep contracting. Literally, the metaphor is then recapitulated in the physical contractions of your mother who delivers you into this world. Like, is this beautiful or what? And then you'll contract until you reach a dimension you are familiar with, form. And then you're going to say, yes, that's me. I'm a body, I'm form, I'm something. Well, welcome to the reincarnation process. This is the phenomenology of rebirth. This is where you're going to be reborn into a dimension, the degree of openness you're familiar with and you can tolerate. So if you're not familiar with openness and you're only familiar with contraction, when infinite openness is revealed, you're going to say, that's not me. Contract, to a dimension you go, yes, that's me. Why? Because I've been meditating on form/body/ego my whole life. Well, welcome to involuntary rebirth. And then the whole cycle just keeps going until you wake up to the process and say, wait a second. Yes, I have this limited sense of identity, but I'm so much more, like you said 2 hours ago. Or another way to say it is I'm so much less. I'm so much more than this. I am these deities. I am these gods. I am the cosmos. Can you open to such a degree to say, like they say in Hinduism, Tattvam Asi, thou art that. If you can, then that's enlightenment.
I meant to ask you about the 3 inner dissolutions now, but how does one not inquire about moksha at this juncture in the conversation? In terms of, we've talked about involuntary incarnation, but in dharmic traditions, Hinduism, Sikhism, there's this real, there's a felt awareness of actually to break free from the cycle of samsara, to have to continuously reincarnate is, and as we're talking about openness, it just seems like a low-hanging fruit at this particular moment in the conversation, which is pretty profound to call moksha a low-hanging fruit in any conversation, if I can say so myself. Touch wood. Thank you, Andrew. At this point, maybe you can describe what moksha is to us and how this all fits in. Is this that the more we open and we train ourselves to open, because we've been meditating on form, like you said, every moment is a meditation, that, you know, the form continues to like we continue to coalesce and contract back into it. But maybe this is the teaching of openness and moksha, is to potentially not have to reincarnate back in.
These are wonderful questions, Emery. Thank you for being so sensitive. I love spending time with people, podcasters like you, who actually take the trouble to read the book and actually take the trouble to really think of such deep questions. So this is a really lovely one. In the tradition as I've come to understand it, and this is no criticism whatsoever to moksha or any other tradition. Who am I to say anything about any of these wisdom traditions? But there are some differences. Many of the traditions, as you allude to, say, yes, the purpose is to get off the wheel of samsara, to get out of the wheel. Well, a couple of things here. One is samsara is not out there. Samsara is a state of mind. It's not a state in reality. You look out on this world, this isn't samsara. This is a pure land. Nirvana is a state of mind. So there isn't a samsara to get out of. What you want to get out of is your construction processes that transform, that contract away from nirvana to create samsara. So the way this relates to moksha in moksha in the Buddhist approach, the goal is not to get out of rebirth. The goal is to get out of involuntary rebirth. Most of our rebirth is driven impulsively, propulsively by unconscious processes born of habit and karma. We are constantly involuntarily reincarnating moment to moment to moment, night to night, life to life, based on the habits of our karma. So this is, again, when my teacher Trungpa Rinpoche was asked so beautifully, what is it that reincarnates? His genius answer was, your bad habits. Your bad habits. And the worst habit, your worst habit is the habit for habitation. We take on existence because we believe in existence. We take on a body because we believe we're somebody. We become a thing because we believe in things. This is huge. So the point here is, don't get out of the play of life and death. Get out of the involuntary play. It's the same thing that happens every night when you fall asleep. You don't wake up and take control over your dream. What does? Your habits, your karma. Just like you said a half an hour ago, you wake up 7 to 9 times in your dream state again. That's an archetypal number. That just means some constancy, some regularity. You want to know where you're going to go after you die? Look at what happens when you sleep and dream. So when you attain and work with lucidity and the nocturnal practices, lucidity is just code language for awareness, you are directly preparing for the Bardos. And so then when you die, you come back out of love, instead of driven involuntarily by ignorance and greed and all the poisons. Now you come back voluntarily manifesting your speech, voluntarily manifesting your mind, voluntarily manifesting a body driven out of love and kindness and compassion and goodness. And you can feel this in what are called the tulkus, or the voluntary nirmanakayas, techno speak, for people who have such control over their hearts and minds. They're so open that they come back into this world, moment to moment, life to life, to serve others out of love and kindness and compassion. So this ties back to this whole issue of emptiness being a funny way of talking about love. You know, the automatic expression of emptiness is fullness, is love, kindness, and compassion. And so beings who inhabit this realm, they come back out of love, voluntarily taking on a body, voluntarily assuming a form, voluntarily acting in the world. Unless we think this is something that can happen when we die, this can happen moment to moment to moment. When we do this type of practice and we realize, you know, every time I feel an impulse, this is another way to practice Bardo yoga. Every time I feel an impulse to say something, to do something, you know, you'll feel a contraction around that impulse. Impulse control is birth control. It's a form of Bardo yoga. So you feel the impulse. What do? Pause button. One breath. Do I really need to take birth in this next thought? Do I really need to take birth in this speech? Do I really need to take birth in this action? That's Bardo yoga right here. No, I don't need to capitulate to my contractions, which give birth. Look at your mom. I can say pause, open. And now when I say something, I say it out of love, kindness, and wisdom, instead of impulsively, reactively out of selfish agendas. This is voluntary birthing. This is what the Bardo principles are all about. Life to life, night to night, or moment to moment. And I keep emphasizing the moment to moment thing because otherwise, oh, this stuff is so esoteric and it only applies to Buddhists. And no, look at your mind right now. You are undergoing the death, rebirth process all the time. Guaranteed. You just have to slow down and guess what? Open up to the point where you see this and you go, oh my gosh, it's so true. With every impulsive gesture of body, speech, and mind, I'm practicing involuntary birthing. We're doing it all the time.
Andrew, you've got a 3-month training that takes people through this psycho-spiritual preparation. I mean, because part of me brings it into the frame because, like, I don't want to say we're out of time because when you're talking about a podcast on death and dying, it's like anyway. But like I had things like the three poisons, your Dharma wheel, how to be there for others. I mean, yeah, there's so many, like, and even if we included all those concepts in, we're probably only touching on like 5 to 10% of what was in the book. There is so, and I have to say, I absolutely adore the book. You remember the first time I tried to get you on the podcast, I was like, oh yeah, I'll prepare for the book. Normally takes me about, 3 days to a week to prepare for a book. Each line is written with such intention, I feel like, that, a paragraph you could sit with for a week. I legitimately, as you read through it, the whole thing is nutritionally very dense. It's for your spirit. So I'm a big fan, but I can imagine the training actually holds space for you. I checked it out online to go through stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about the training for those that are inclined to want to maybe have their hand held through and dive in even deeper than when we are today?
Thank you for the kind words about the book. I put my heart into this book, as I did with this program that is really, I mean, I've been preparing for this program my entire life, honestly. Formally, I've been preparing it for 10 years. We launched it 2 years ago. And as you're saying, Amrit, it's a really, really deep dive, 3-month deep dive into exactly these teachings. I try to make the material as non-sectarian and secular. Yes, I do use the Buddhist template, but no one has a patent on truth, So I draw a lot on philosophy, on neuroscience and physics and the non-dual wisdom traditions to bring forth a way of working with it. So 50 hours of pre-recorded content, weekly gatherings with me, discussion groups, interviews with religious scholars from all the different traditions. It's a massive offering, and it's an ongoing offering. So even though it does officially end in 3 months on one level, it lives in perpetuity because you have access. There's ongoing meetings every 3 months. You have access to future courses as they unfold because every time I do it, I learn, I grow, there's new material. And so it's a way to really create a sense of powerful community so that we can hold each other during the course itself and then start to really hold each other when we're dying. Create literally holding environments of love, kindness, compassion, where we now can hold ourselves as we go through this type of path. So I'm very appreciative of you saying that. I did want to say one very small tongue-in-cheek thing. You talk about running out of time. Well, this is exactly what's going to happen when we die. This is what we talk about in the Course. Co-emergent with the ego. So 2 seconds because I can't help myself.
No, I appreciate it.
Co-emergent with the sense of self. And this is important. Co-emergent with the sense of self arises its retinue of space, time, and causality. The very things that we take to be givens, axiomatic, the space, time, causality, the things that we think dictate this reality, they're made up. They're constructs. And the cognitive neuroscientists will tell you this. The physicists will tell you this. Listen to Nima Arkani Hamed's Princeton talk, Space-Time is Doomed. The wisdom traditions say this. And so this is what's so beautiful when we die. We literally run out of time. We run out of space. We run out of causality. We run out of ego and into the truth, which is pre-temporal, pre-spatial, pre-causal. We enter this non-dual dimension where space, time, causality, and the self-sense, which all co-emerge or constructed, are deconstructed. So what we do in this course is I point this out in exquisite detail and show how ego, the world's fastest and most efficient construction company, in the blink of an eye, the ego, as we're sitting here, is creating a sense of self and other. It's creating a dualistic world in lightning speeds right now. You can witness this come apart in deep meditation. You can witness this come apart in the nocturnal meditations, and you will witness it come apart when you die. And so therefore, if you realize the self, sense, ego, duality, and suffering is all made up, it's a construct, well, guess what? You can die before you die. You can deconstruct all these processes through these incredible spiritual technologies and radically, irrevocably change your relationship to the end of life. Looking forward to it is the return to the primordial matrix, the mother of reality. And then it's a great way to end. Take this extraordinary wisdom and use it as compassion to help others make this transition, to be with them when they're dying. You don't even have to say a word because these teachings are then embodied in your very being. Your mere presence will transform the dying person because you've come to embody, literally incorporate this material. So this is a great place to wrap up.
Andrew Holecek, thank you so much. I mean, yeah, my intention with this podcast once again was to, espouse what the book espoused for me, which is a sense of familiarity. And so the uncertainty dissolves and this real relaxation can start to, and the openness is, as you said, at the heart of every spiritual path. And, I think it's very easy to sort of identify, as you said, follow your bliss is such an easy PR campaign to get behind. It's the PR campaign writes itself. Whereas this work that you're doing, which is, embrace your, the scared corners of your mind in light of what is the ultimate truth is beyond profound. And yeah, I mean, just the way that you carry this work, even with the humor interlaced and interwoven through it, thank you for your time and sharing here today. But also, this is very much so your life's work. I know there's other bodies of your work as well that sort of, and for me, just, thank you so much for you, Andrew, carrying this work the way that you are. Deep, deep, deep respect. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the very kind words. And again, I'm not being patronizing when I say I deeply appreciate your wonderful, intelligent, and heartfelt questions. It's what makes a conversation like this so rich and so worthwhile. So thank you for the good that you're bringing to this world, my friend.
Thank you. Inspired soul, you've made it through to the end of another incredible episode. How much did you love this episode? Touchwood, it was one of my favorites. I have to say, learning from Andrew Holecek about death, dying, rebirth, my goodness, an absolute gift. So I really sincerely hope this episode supported you on your journey. And if you feel like there's any loved ones that would really benefit from this episode, please do share this with them. You've obviously watched all the way through the end, so you do like this video. Please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps with everything that's going on here. And I have to say, to all of you that are subscribed to the channel, thank you so much for your incredible love and support. As I like to say, everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to this channel. So thank you so much for your loving support. And to all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution right there. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon. Episodes like this coming out twice a week to champion love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet together. You can join the movement, hit that subscribe button. Now, on screen for you to take your Inspired Evolution even further, episodes around death, rebirth, dying, and also near-death experiences and pre-life memories. So go on, take your pick and make your click. I'll see you in the next one.